good morning, colleagues. My name is Michela Asangpon. I work for the World Food Program. I also co-facilitate the INCE initiative, and I will be moderating this roundtable on the role of culture and context in assessing national evaluation capacities today. First of all, I would like to give you a warm welcome and thank you for joining us today. Secondly, I would like to make sure that everyone knows where to find the translation, since we will have participants joining from Latin America and also from Sub-Saharan Africa. We have interpretation, and if you need interpretation from Spanish to English or from English to Spanish, please go to the bottom right corner of this Zoom meeting. You will see a little globe. And Oscar, if you could put up the infographic, it would be just perfect so that we can also see it on the screen. And on the little globe, you can choose the language you would like to listen the session in. So you see there is a little globe where the red dart is pointing. And what we would like you to do, if you need a translation from Spanish to English, to choose English and mute the original version. Or if you want to listen to us in Spanish, please choose Spanish as your language and mute the original version. In case you understand both languages, you can keep the original audio. So I hope you all managed to choose your language. In case you have any questions, please do write it down in the chats, and the colleagues who are assisting us today with the technical support will try to help you. Now I will repeat the same instructions in Spanish, and then we will start. Buenas tardes, buenos días, queridos y queridas colegas. Mi nombre es Michela Asangpon. Yo trabajo para el Programa Mundial de Alimentos como oficial de evaluación y cofacilito también la iniciativa del Índice de Capacidades Nacionales de Evaluación. Y hoy voy a estar moderando esta mesa redonda sobre el rol de cultura y de contexto en la valoración de capacidades nacionales en evaluación. Ante todo, me gustaría darles una calurosa bienvenida y agradecerles por sumarse a nosotras y nosotros hoy en día. Y en segundo lugar, como vamos a tener una traducción, una interpretación simultánea de la sesión, porque tenemos tanto participantes de América Latina como de África subsahariana, me gustaría asegurarme que todas y todos saben cómo activar el modo de interpretación. Como pueden ver en la infografía en la pantalla, en la esquina inferior derecha hay un pequeño globo, y cuando dan clic al globo, allá pueden escoger su idioma. Si prefieren escuchar la sesión en español, escogen por favor español y hagan clic al mute original version, la versión original, la ponen en mute. Si desean escucharnos en la versión original, pueden también quedarse en la versión original. Espero que no hay ningún inconveniente y que todos han podido escoger la versión de idioma que les guste, y en caso que hubiera alguna pregunta, no duden en escribirla en el chat. Y con esto podemos quitar la infografía ya. Y me gustaría empezar I would like to start with a brief introduction. And I'm very honored to be here in a company of very distinguished speakers today. So I will present them briefly. I would like to start with Sarah Clear, who is from DEval, and you may know that the WFP has been working closely with DEval on the National Evaluation Capacities Index. Sarah is the head of DEval's work towards building evaluation capacities and the team leader of the ECD project for SELAC+. She has worked extensively with national evaluation systems in Latin America, and her most recent academic work examines a systemic approach to evaluation capacity development from a theoretical perspective. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. We are also joined by Sophie Kang'oma. Sophie is a demographer with over 22 years of service experience in 3 key government ministries and departments in Malawi. She launched her Good to see you, Sophie. She launched her career as a statistician working for the National Statistical Office. Thereafter, Sophie spent 10 years with the National Registration Bureau, first as deputy director and then as director. And currently, Sophie is the director of Malawi's Monitoring and Evaluation Division in the Ministry of Economic Planning and Development. Thank you, Sophie, for joining us today. We have also the pleasure to have with us today Patricia Moreno. Patricia is a political scientist and holds a master's degree in economics from the University de los Andes. She has held different positions as a monitoring and evaluation specialist in different institutions at national and international cooperation organizations. She is currently Deputy Director for Evaluation of the Directorate of Monitoring and Evaluation of Public Policies of the National Planning Department in Colombia. Thank you, Patricia, for being here with us today. Now I would like to introduce you Andrea Peroni Fiscarelli. Andrea is a sociologist and history professor with PhD in American Studies. She coordinates the interdisciplinary nucleus in evaluative research oriented on public decision. She is also co-founder of the Chilean Evaluation Network and consultant in evaluation and social policies. Andrea was member of the executive committee of ReLAC and its vice coordinator in the period 2018-2020. Andrea, thank you very much for accepting this invitation today. We also have academia represented from Sub-Saharan Africa, and I'm pleased to welcome here Candice Morkel. Candice is the director of the CLEAR Anglophone Africa and a senior lecturer in monitoring and evaluation at the Wits University in South Africa. Candice has 25 years experience in government, academia, and the nonprofit sector, specializing in monitoring and evaluation and public policy. Candice, thank you very much for joining the session today. Further, we have Maria Celeste Giano. Celeste is a current general coordinator of the ReLAC, Latin America and the Caribbean network of monitoring, evaluation, and systematization. She's a political scientist and holds PhD in public administration with a dissertation on professionalization of evaluation in Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome, Celeste, and thank you very much for joining. And we are also accompanied by Francis Matuta. Francis is a seasoned social scientist with more than 19 years of intensive and progressive experience in monitoring, evaluation, and learning. He holds a Master of Arts degree in political science and a bachelor degree in social science, both from University of Malawi, and currently works for UN Women Malawi as the monitoring and evaluation and reporting of specialist. Thank you very much, Francis, for joining us today. I would like to also invite the attendees, if they could introduce themselves briefly in the chat. You can tell us where you are joining us from, your name, and what is your current position. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to write them in the chat throughout the session. And we will have a space for questions and answers at the end of the discussion. And without further ado, I would like us to dive into the topic and hand over to Sarah Clear, who will give us a brief keynote during which she will explain why we decided to organize this roundtable. So the floor is yours, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Michaela, for this nice introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you for the honor to introduce this exciting roundtable, and it's very exciting to me, not only because I'm a big fan of the INCE, but also because I looked a lot into systems theory and what we can learn from systems theory for evaluation systems. And whenever you look into any paper on systems theory, you will learn very fast that every system adapts, changes, reacts according to its context. And that's true for evaluation systems, and that's true for every system. And that sounds very abstract, very theoretically, perhaps a little boring, but it's not. And I want to make it concrete why it's so relevant. And want to refer to an example which we are all familiar with, which is the traffic system. Every country has a traffic system. And all the traffic systems in the world have more or less the same components: pedestrians, cars, buses, bikes, traffic lights, rules, regulations, you name it. And still they differ a lot. And the surprising thing is that they differ even in those points where they officially do not differ, where there is no difference. Let's take the traffic light, for example. A red traffic light in most traffic systems, countries of the world means stop. You need to stop. In Germany, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, when you haven't seen another car for hours, you will stop at a red light, and you will only continue driving once it switches to green, because we follow that rule. It does not depend too much on the rest of the situation. And I know that in other countries you wouldn't, that there are jokes about the Germans who would stop at a red light in the middle of nowhere. And so you see, we have the same rules, but we interpret them in another way, because some people might think, okay, so there's the rule, but here's nobody, so I cross the street. And I can give you another example how culture has an impact on the system, on the traffic system. In Germany, we do not have a speed limit on most of the some of the highways or the Autobahn. And no evidence in this world will suggest not to have a speed limit. It's the opposite. You should have a speed limit, but we don't. And that's pure cultural. Many Germans are very attached to their cars. I am not, but many Germans are very attached to their cars. So we don't have a speed limit. It's pure culture. So if culture has such a huge effect on something as boring as the German traffic system, we might imagine how culture, context impacts on an evaluation system. So yeah, there's culture, context is very important. But at the same time, I want to stress how important it is that the different systems can learn from each other, although they might differ a lot. And again, I want to give an example from the traffic system. Like 20 years ago, I lived in Bogota in Colombia. I think Patricia, you and I, we went to the same university, Universidad de los Andes. And there I often took the bus, like a special bus, which has its own lanes, its own bus stops. It works like a metro. And I know that this special bus system, it was adapted to other countries like Chile, Mexico, and I think others. So we see that although context might differ, although culture might differ, there are still components that we can learn from each other in different systems. However, for that, we will need exchange. We need the different systems need to come together to learn from each other. And this is what INCE is for me. INCE is a network for me. It's an opportunity to learn about each other and an opportunity to learn from each other. And this is what we will do today. This is what this roundtable is all about. I'm very happy to hear what made the INCE so special in Latin America, how the Latin American culture, the Latin American context influences evaluation systems. And of course, I'm looking very much forward to hear from colleagues from Africa, what they think is special about evaluation systems and what components evaluation systems in Africa should have. Yeah, so let's begin to learn about and from each other.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for this inspiring introduction. And now let us dive into the discussion. So the first question we have prepared for the discussants is, in your view, how do culture and context influence and are reflected in national evaluation systems? And I would like you, Patricia, to start with your reflections, and we will first have a look in Latin America, and then we will move to our colleagues from Africa. So over to you, Patricia.
Hola, buenos días y buenas tardes. Un gusto para mí estar acá. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Bueno, en el caso de Colombia, el ente rector del sistema de evaluaciones es el Departamento Nacional de Planeación, que hace parte de la rama ejecutiva del nivel central. Y desde el Departamento Nacional de Planeación, pues contamos con una dirección de seguimiento de evaluación de políticas públicas, contamos con una subdirección de evaluación. Entonces, digamos que el DNP se ha encargado de tener ese arreglo institucional que le permita hacer evaluación. Pero este arreglo institucional es respuesta a las diferentes leyes y decretos que nos obligan a hacer evaluaciones. Porque el DNP, entre sus diferentes funciones, tiene la función constitucional y también reglamentaria de hacer evaluaciones. Entonces, en este sentido, este contexto normativo no solamente obligó a que el departamento se adaptara para responder a digamos que esa obligación de hacer evaluaciones, sino que ese contexto normativo también es el que ha permitido ir fortaleciendo, ir generando de manera gradual una cultura de evaluación en Colombia, porque este contexto normativo también determina cómo debe ser nuestro proceso de evaluación. Y creo que uno de los puntos principales sobre este contexto normativo y sobre estas obligaciones que tenemos es que nosotros anualmente tenemos que estructurar una agenda de evaluaciones que incorpore temas estratégicos o temas de coyuntura que tenemos que evaluar en cada vigencia. Esto lo venimos haciendo más o menos desde hace casi que 30 años, entonces eso ha ido fortaleciendo la cultura de evaluación en el país. Ya todos saben que desde el DNP nosotros hacemos evaluaciones anuales con la que tratamos de entregar información que permita incidir con evidencia para la toma de decisiones. Y adicionalmente, y digamos que esto hace parte del proceso, pero también está definido en uno de los decretos, este proceso de construcción de la agenda es un proceso de construcción conjunta que no solamente, digamos, se determina por parte del DNP, sino que en ese proceso de definición participan diferentes actores, participan diferentes ministerios, departamentos administrativos, también direcciones técnicas del DNP, con lo que buscamos que esa agenda de evaluaciones sea una agenda diversa, que responda a las necesidades de información de diferentes sectores, pero que también responda con diferentes tipos de evaluación para poder responder a esas diferentes preguntas que tienen los sectores. Entonces yo creo que eso ha ido fortaleciendo la cultura de evaluación. Al DNP año a año las entidades demandan un gran número de evaluaciones. Desafortunadamente no podemos responder a esa alta demanda, pero tratamos de consolidar agendas de, no sé, en promedio entre 15, 20 evaluaciones anuales. Adicionalmente, y en la ejecución de nuestras evaluaciones, trabajamos con diferentes actores que han ido, digamos que ampliando nuestro ecosistema de evaluación, como son firmas de consultoría, también banca multilateral, organismos de cooperación internacional y academia, pero pues por supuesto sabemos que todavía tenemos mucho espacio por trabajar en el fortalecimiento de nuestro proceso de evaluación y por eso el año pasado expedimos un documento de política que está orientado precisamente a fortalecer el proceso de evaluaciones asociado al uso de las mismas, pero también a la generación de evaluaciones. No sé si tengo más tiempo o eso que sonó era que ya se me acabó el tiempo. Pero bueno, si quieren, dejo por acá para no consumir más tiempo.
The sound was that I think someone entered in the room, but I would suggest that we now go over to Celeste, and then if you want to complement something on the reflection of Celeste, Andrea, and the other colleagues, then you can have a little bit more space after their contributions. So over to you, Celeste.
Ok, muchas gracias. En este caso, en nombre de ReLAC, estamos muy honrados por esta invitación y muy entusiasmadas y entusiasmados por el intercambio con el África subsahariana. Una experiencia que, como dijo Sara, nos parece muy interesante para aprender unos de otros. En ese sentido, también nos tocó como organización participar desde los inicios de la creación del INCE y personalmente también vinculada activamente. En ese marco, pensando en el contexto y la cultura y cómo están presentes nuestros sistemas de evaluación, qué decir más que las propias dimensiones del INCE fueron pensadas y creadas y apropiadas por nosotros mismos, por nuestra propia gente, a partir de nuestra propia cultura. Y nuestra cultura está repleta de diversidad. Casualmente, el día de ayer estábamos en otro evento similar pensando la diversidad cultural que tiene nuestra región, no solo de idiomas, sino de culturas, de ideas, de ideologías, e inclusive los cambios sociales y políticos que nos atraviesan permanentemente. Esos cambios que nos llevan a tener que también modificar nuestros procesos para planificar y para evaluar, y también modificar nuestras profesiones y fortalecernos, y asimismo nuestras instituciones. Eso es lo que el INCE nos está permitiendo, poder medir estos cambios, poder valorarlos. Una de las cuestiones que estuvo muy presente y que reflejan a nuestros sistemas multivariados de evaluación tiene que ver con nuestra participación inicial de más de 26 organizaciones para elaborar las 5 dimensiones, y como siempre digo, una dimensión muy cara y muy querida para nosotros es la dimensión multiactoral, multiactor, espacio de diálogo multiactor, que hace que los resultados del INCE sean más diversos. Nos muestra un sistema de evaluación desde nuestra cultura y desde nuestra interpretación. Esto es lo que considero y consideramos desde ReLAC, que un poco estamos en intercambio permanente con nuestras redes nacionales y con instituciones miembros de cada país. Sucede, ¿verdad? Hacer este vínculo entre los distintos actores, nuestras VOPEs, nuestras organizaciones voluntarias de evaluación, con los gobiernos, con la academia, con las organizaciones internacionales que se asientan en cada país, para que haya una mirada completa, integral, sobre el desarrollo y el avance de nuestros sistemas nacionales. Entonces, esta pertenencia o sentido de pertenencia es lo que permiten este tipo de herramientas para que nuestra cultura y nuestro contexto sean visibilizados y tenidos en cuenta y tomados en cuenta en nuestros sistemas nacionales de evaluación.
Muy interesante, very interesting. Thank you very much, Celeste. And now I would like to hand over to Andrea, because I know she also has a reflection on how the culture and the context has influenced the systems in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Hola, buenos días a todos desde aquí, desde el sur del continente. Me parece súper interesante esta conversación y cómo podemos reflexionar sobre la misma desde puntos de vista distintos. Cuando yo pensaba en cómo afrontar una pregunta como la que nos están planteando aquí, y pensándola en relación a los colegas del continente africano, decía, bueno, ¿cuáles son las grandes diferencias o las propiedades del continente? Y un poco ya lo mencionaba Celeste sobre las características de nuestro continente. Tal vez solo recordar que después de la pandemia se acrecentaron todos los indicadores de bienestar, se retrocedió por lo menos al 2017, no hubo más crecimiento en el PIB, la pobreza aumentó, la desigualdad también, no se ha retomado sendas anteriores, y uno cuando piensa todo eso dice, bueno, ¿qué es lo que la institucionalidad hace o qué es lo que se recomienda para la institucionalidad en la región. Y curiosamente lo que se recomienda está absolutamente dirigido a las políticas sociales. En ningún momento se recomienda que la evaluación tiene que hacerse cargo de ello. Entonces, pensando en esta característica tan propia, ¿no? Como que la institución es la que te tiene que hacer cargo, pero desde la política, no desde la evaluación, me parecía que era algo muy propio de la región. Y entonces, ¿cómo hacemos para permear los sistemas de evaluación cuando tenemos contextos tan álgidos, tan complejos, tan diversos, tan múltiples? Y en ese sentido me parecía súper interesante la experiencia cultural que ha significado introducirse en los sistemas gubernamentales desde fuera, no desde el contexto social, político, desde la crisis, sino desde fuera. Y ahí yo creo que la articulación que se ha hecho desde el índice fue un elemento que permitió dialogar con los gobiernos que no tenían necesariamente la inquietud de mejorar la evaluación en los contextos candentes de crisis que ha dejado, al menos en estos últimos años, la pandemia en la región. Por eso me parecía importante pensar que no es los gobiernos quienes se adecúan, sino que lo hacen pensando en sistemas mejores de evaluación, sino que a través de las políticas sociales responden a los problemas contingentes y que es necesario entonces una intervención extragubernamental para ir generando estos cambios en los sistemas de evaluación que luego hacen mucho sentido. Me parece que esto ha sido como una característica en este último tiempo sobre la cultura en la región, la cultura y los sistemas de evaluación.
Thank you very much, Andrea. This is a very interesting reflection, and also very interesting how you bring it together with the context of crisis and the polycrisis that we are experimenting right now. With that, I would like to hand over now to Sophie Kang'oma. Sophie, what is your take on the role of culture and context in national evaluation systems, and how do you see it from the perspective of Malawi and the African continent? You're on mute, Sophie. We cannot hear you.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, I was saying thank you so much for considering Malawi to be part of this interesting discussion. As for Malawi, I think we started working on strengthening evaluation way back. I'm from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, the Department of Economic Planning and Development. This is the department that is responsible for monitoring and evaluation within the public sector. So we provide the technical backstopping to different ministries. We do have the planning units in all the ministries within the government. And those planning units, they do have the monitoring and evaluation sections. So we started strengthening evaluation way back. We had the master plan, and through this master plan, a lot of initiatives were introduced, especially strengthening monitoring and evaluation at all levels, including the council levels. We were doing this with the support from development partners. So once the project came to an end, some of the gains that were made through the project were not sustained, mainly because the evaluation system is not institutionalized. So like in the councils, we employed monitoring and evaluation officers on a temporary basis, but the government failed to mainstream them into the government system. So it's more like the capacity was lost, along the way due to the lack of institutionalization of monitoring and evaluation system. Noting these setbacks, we did the monitoring and evaluation situation analysis, and we came up with the the capacity building strategies. There are about 10 interventions. So one of the interventions is to strengthening capacity for evaluation within the government system. So right now, the government has embarked on institutionalizing both monitoring as well as the evaluation. So we have a government-wide monitoring. We are trying to establish a government-wide monitoring and evaluation system. This is where we are. However, the evaluations are happening at sector levels, but I might say coordination, it's not, it's there, but it hasn't yet reached at that desirable stage to make sure that we are sustaining or we are institutionalizing the monitoring and evaluation. But the other critical area that we are looking into, it's the monitoring and evaluation frameworks. These are all the logical frameworks. These are very, very important. After having the strategic plans, we needed to have these the logical frameworks to guide the monitoring and the evaluation systems. So there are a number of activities that we have embarked on to make sure that we do have a strong evaluation system. I think right now I can stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sophie. And I think it's interesting that you speak along the same lines as Patricia as well, who was telling us about the importance of having the national evaluation system institutionalized. And now I would like to hand over to you, Candice, and wondering if you can also try to react on what the other participants were saying along about with your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Michaela, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me here to share my thoughts. And most definitely, I think what Sarah began to tell us about the similarities between cultures and contexts, especially when you talk about the bureaucracy and how bureaucracies and public administrations operate globally. I think there are many, many similarities, and I definitely think we can learn from each other. And just hearing Sophie speak, for example, there are so many other contexts on the African continent who follow the same trajectory or the same pathway to the establishment of national evaluation systems. But I think that the nuances, the African continent is also very different regionally. We are very different in terms of our country context as well. And I think the value of learning from each other, where those nuances are, or where those differences are in how institutions are strengthened and how we develop them, I think we definitely can learn from some kind of process of peer learning and some kind of pillars about what does it mean to establish a really strong, efficient, effective, robust evaluation system. So we can have some sort of pattern or some kind of pillars of a national evaluation system, but certainly they will have differences, that will have variances in exactly how they manifest and how they develop depending on the region or the country context. So that's the one element of how context makes us different. But I also think there's one element of context that we don't necessarily take very seriously when we're talking about in-country evaluation systems, and that is the very, very strong influence of the political context and how the electoral system actually drives how governance works and how political systems work and how evaluation systems are actually embedded within those. And I think we need to pay a little more attention to that context, because what happens is that we do find sometimes that there's a bit of instrumentalism, and here I'm talking about public policy instrumentalism, or what some people call ritualization, where because there is a demand for different in terms of governance, there's now national and international demands for stronger evidence-informed decision-making. We are finding that administrations sometimes establish systems which have, the institutional architecture, but they don't really add a lot of value in evidence-based decision-making or evidence-informed decision-making, because they are there for the sake of existing. And I think that is what we need to be really careful about in, trying to grow and establish all of these evaluation systems in many countries. We have to really focus on the fact that how does that particular political context, the governance context, how does it allow for, where are those layers of leverage where we can ensure that evaluation really becomes part of the evidence and policy and budget decision-making cycles. Because sometimes in these contexts, the existing system of decision-making is so set in stone, if I can put it that way, that it doesn't, that the national evaluation system is almost developed in parallel to the decision-making system. And I think that context needs to be a lot more, we need to be much more aware of it as evaluators. Those of us who are working in evaluation systems need to make sure that we're not just developing all of these, and establishing the institutional architecture to produce the evidence that doesn't really make meaning in policy making. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Candice. That's quite thought-provoking. I know that the evidence use, it's a hard nut to crack. I know Patricia has another local session on that tomorrow with CONEVAL from Mexico. And I think, all of us, we are thinking about it. So now we are doing evaluations, but what do we do that they are actually used where they need to be used, and that money is allocated to implement the recommendations. So thanks a lot for this contribution. And now I'd like to hand the floor to Francis. Francis, what is your take on the role of context and culture in national evaluation systems?
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be part and parcel of this panel discussion. First and foremost, I need to recognize that indeed culture and context have an impact on the evaluation or the quality of the evaluation. It has been our ambition as government, of course, and also other stakeholders, to have the decisions that we make to be based on timely and also credible evidence, including evaluative evidence. So in terms of the context in which we are, for Malawi, I think from my experience, we are still on the way in terms of having evaluations that are timely and also that would provide credible evidence. We also, I think, just like with the other sectors and also in the other areas, when they are in the process of maybe aligning to the international standards in terms of the normative frameworks, the policies. And I understand at present we have a draft national policy on monitoring and evaluation. So these are things that we are going through in terms of the context, and they give us the hope that very soon, or in the nearest future, would have high quality, accessible, timely, reliable, and disaggregated data from the evaluations that we are conducting. But also in terms of the context, we also need to recognize the fact that we have most of the projects being implemented or being driven by Malawi government, of course, but also we also have got a good number of programs or projects that are being driven and also being funded by the donors, in which case, in terms of commissioning of the national evaluations or national level evaluations, and also maybe the programs or project specific evaluations, there are also interests that get into this. And in most of the cases, much as maybe there would be evaluations on projects or programs implemented by the Malawi government, we also see evaluators coming from outside the country, and also maybe those that are private practicing evaluators coming in to carry out the work. This to me is progress, but also I also want to mention the fact that on the part of the the specialists themselves. We've seen of late the establishment and also the growth of the Association of Monitoring and Evaluation Specialists, which has been or which is connected to our FREA. Again, this is something that is, or the development that is taking place in the context. And alongside that, we have also seen a new generation of evaluation specialists. Previously, we had specific people that you would actually see when an advert is plotted, applying to do an evaluation. But now we are having a new generation of experts in evaluation, moving from the academicians that we have used over time to really have people that are experts in the evaluation and also maybe experts in monitoring to carry out this work. So they are adapting to the new guidelines. For example, in our case, as UN Women, we are propagating the gender responsive evaluations. So this is a progress that we are seeing. But I think there are areas that I think I would mention later on that we think maybe we need to ensure that we also emphasize. My director also talked about issues of capacity, which is talking about the resources for us to produce quality evaluations, which again would require sufficient capacity at institution, organization, and also individual levels. Let me stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. It's been very interesting contribution across the capacity development, different levels, right? Individual, institutional, and also the enabling environment. And with that, I would like us to move to the second question we have for this discussion. And I would like us to look deeper into how culture and context influence the development of the National Evaluation Capacities Index in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I would like to start with Andrea Peroni. She's been involved in the initiative since the very beginning. So Andrea, could you please briefly tell us what was the process? And then we will have Celeste to tell us what the National Evaluation Capacities Index is now and how it's still being anchored within the culture and context of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Sí, bueno, yo voy a compartir con ustedes un poco el origen, cómo fue el proceso y después con Celeste avanzamos en los otros temas. Y el origen del índice tiene que ver con la Agenda 2030, tiene que ver con, este es un recorrido que se hizo en ese momento, tiene que ver con la conformación de un grupo de trabajo que se plantea ante los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, cómo estos se podían vincular al desarrollo de capacidades en el área de la evaluación, y con esa inquietud se generó un grupo motor donde estaba DEval, Mideplan de Costa Rica, CLIA, ReLAC, Techo para Chile. En la región se pensó desde su inicio de manera multiactor y la inquietud fuerte estaba en el desarrollo de capacidades vinculada a la agenda, la meta 16.6, crear a todos los niveles institucionales eficaces y transparentes que rindan cuenta. Entonces, ¿cómo se podía hacer esa vinculación? Esto fue como esta idea partió como en el 15 y maduró 17, 18, y en el 18, bueno, se tomó ya con mucho más vigor la situación de América Latina para vincularlo al desarrollo del índice. Estos son los colegas de Techo para Chile en la región. Las primeras definiciones a partir del 18 le dieron el primer cuerpo al índice. Ahí se trabajó también de manera multiactor. En ese momento los temas cruciales eran, uno de los temas cruciales era la representatividad, cómo hacemos que estén todos y todos quienes tienen interés en el índice, interés de ser parte en el índice, y cómo nos organizamos, porque esta era una tarea absolutamente voluntaria. Y entonces, bueno, un equipo promotor que conducía el proceso, un equipo que se llamó comité asesor, un grupo de trabajo donde éramos de los más diversos y consultores específicos para temas puntuales. Y ahí, bueno, ahí se empezó a delimitar quiénes eran todos los integrantes que deberían estar interesados en el índice para mejorar la calidad de las evaluaciones, para el desarrollo de capacidades, y cómo todos estos integrantes con sus distintos roles tenían algo que decir sobre demanda de evaluaciones, sobre qué se evalúa, sobre la experiencia de las agencias de cooperación, sobre los efectos en la sociedad civil, sobre el uso de las evaluaciones, y se fue involucrando a cada uno de estos actores que conforman este ecosistema. Y aquí compartir con ustedes, bueno, el punto de partida formal en Costa Rica en el 2018, donde seguramente pueden identificar colegas conocidos para la región. Y después de esto, el índice empieza a caminar con mucho más prestancia, solvencia, estructura. Presentamos esta propuesta en el Congreso Latinoamericano de Administración para el Desarrollo en el 2019 y presentamos aquí la estructura del índice. ¿Cuáles eran los elementos claves, las dimensiones que debería sostener el desarrollo del índice? Nuevamente la pregunta de quiénes deberían estar involucrados, gobierno, sociedad civil y entidades regionales, y esto es absolutamente novedoso en relación al desarrollo de otros índices. Aquí está la presentación que hicimos en Buenos Aires sobre el índice y cómo ha seguido caminando hacia el desarrollo de capacidades de evaluación en cada uno de los países. Entonces, en la segunda etapa, donde el índice sale a los países, se la dejo a Celeste para compartir con ustedes al respecto.
Muy bien, muchas gracias Andrea. Voy a compartir apenas una pantalla allí, no sé si esto se alcanza a ver, ok. Bien, bueno, lo he puesto en inglés, pero lo voy a comentar en español. Actualmente ustedes pueden ver, no sé, ¿se ve bien?
Celeste, ¿lo podrías poner en el presentation mode, por favor?
Así, ahora sí.
Sí, gracias.
Muy bien, gracias Michala. Como pueden ver en este momento, bueno, nosotros comenzamos a hacer las mediciones, medición piloto 2020, se hizo en 5 países y se comenzó las mediciones en el año 2021. Actualmente tenemos 10 países que ya están haciendo su medición, y algunos que ya han repetido porque hacemos la medición cada 2 años. Y hay 7 países que inclusive han desarrollado sus talleres de uso, que decimos, para identificar fortalezas y debilidades, usando esta evidencia para sus planes nacionales. Como bien contaba Patricia, Colombia fue uno de los 7 países que ya ha hecho sus talleres de uso, utilizando toda esta información, toda esta evidencia para pensar y tomar decisiones en lo que respecta a políticas de desarrollo en el país. Andrea bien decía que se comenzó con 26 organizaciones, ahora ustedes pueden ver que se ha incrementado a más de 50 organizaciones que están actualmente involucradas en la actualización de la herramienta, porque siempre decimos que es una herramienta flexible, una herramienta dinámica que debe adaptarse a las necesidades y a los cambios. Una de esas modificaciones fue la profundización de un par de preguntas vinculadas a la perspectiva de género en todo el proceso de evaluación y en los resultados y en el uso de las evaluaciones, también en el marco de derechos humanos. Con respecto a la segunda parte que respecta a esta pregunta, que es cómo la cultura y el contexto influenciaron, me gustaría compartir un par de cuestiones, si se quiere, metodológicas del INCE que han colaborado allí y que tienen que ver con el contexto y la cultura de cada uno de los países. Por ejemplo, sí notamos que la herramienta al trabajar no solamente con hechos, sino con percepciones sobre el Sistema Nacional de Evaluación, lo que permite es hacer una interpretación propia y permitir esa apropiación de la información. Entonces podíamos ver resultados muy diversos. Si bien nuestra intención siempre es, y siempre decimos que el INCE debe ser una herramienta para comparar un antes y un después propio en cada país, cómo va evolucionando, también en la mirada externa y desde afuera, uno puede percibir cómo cada país se ve a sí mismo. Y eso es muy rico y muy interesante y aporta a, creo que Candice comentaba, esta posibilidad de trabajo entre pares. Y aprender el desarrollo y el uso de esta evidencia entre pares. También la herramienta, una de las cuestiones que permite y apropió y utilizó desde nuestra cultura latinoamericana de feedback, de devolución, de solidaridad, es esta posibilidad de seleccionar a los primeros informantes, como bien Andrea decía, del gobierno, de la sociedad civil, de organismos internacionales asentados en el país, esta posibilidad de seleccionar a los primeros informantes, de elevar la invitación desde lo que decimos el ente rector, que siempre es gubernamental, hace a la herramienta también más apropiable, más propia para utilizar. De acuerdo a lo que planteaba Andrea, y en total coincidencia, esta fue una herramienta que fue creada aquí y fue tomando forma desde nuestra cultura y desde nuestro contexto, y también algo muy interesante es que casualmente tenemos muchas particularidades y muchas cosas en común con África. Entonces, escuchando a los colegas, nos encontramos con muchos elementos en común y con una herramienta que no deja de ser adaptable de acuerdo a estas necesidades, ¿verdad?, de información. Y también una pequeña herramienta que colabora con el INCE tiene que ver con una planilla optativa que permite también profundizar en algunas particularidades que no estuvieran. Entonces, esto nos permite de alguna manera dejar plasmada nuestra cultura, no solamente que nuestra cultura influye en la herramienta y en el uso de la herramienta y cómo muestra los resultados, sino que la herramienta es la que permite también ver nuestra cultura y nuestro contexto, y yo me quedo aquí, Michala.
Thank you very much, Celeste, for such a succinct presentation of what the INCE is today and how it builds on all this collaboration. And now I would like to move to our colleagues from Sub-Saharan Africa. And I would like to start with Sophie. In your view, what elements of context and culture need to be considered in case we would be thinking about a similar tool for Sub-Saharan Africa? So in case we would be thinking about an assessment of national evaluation systems in Sub-Saharan Africa, what think that needs to be taken into consideration in your context? Over to you, Sophie.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not much conversant with the tool. However, going through the 5 dimensions and thinking that mostly is being done through the workshops or group discussions, my suggestion would be that this information from the group discussions should also be supported by the individual interviews, because in group discussions, sometimes there is the tendency of providing peer acceptable responses in some cases, or in sometimes it's just the respect, because my boss has said this, then I can't go against what he has said. So my proposal is that we should also do the random individual interviews, or to share the tools to the individuals, so that we can support the outcomes of the group discussions. The individual outcomes can verify the group discussion outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting thought, because so far, and maybe Patricia, then you can tell us something about it, how you experience it from the DNP, but we've been really promoting this collective answer by institution, because we thought the advantage of this is generating a discussion, but Candice mentioned it, the bureaucratic structures sometimes are very complex. So that's an excellent point that we need to be thinking about. And now I would like to ask Francis, so what is your take on this? What do you think that we would need to be taking into account further to Sophie's contribution? You're on mute.
Yes, thank you very much.
Now we can.
Yes, thank you. I just have got a few points, I think 3. First and foremost, to say that generally the tool is very okay. And the elements that are in the tool in measuring national evaluation capacities are fine and also inclusive. And I also want to applaud the participatory approach that is used, touching on the individual, organization, and also on the environment. However, I think I want to put across the following for consideration. One is, given our context and also the situation, we also need to have an interest in assessing and also monitoring on how resource mobilization is performing. I'm referring to resource mobilization towards implementation of evaluations, because this is an area that is usually under-resourced, and in most of the cases, we have not planned very well in terms of mobilizing resources and also budgeting for evaluations. And also for the fact that in Malawi and also maybe for some of the sub-Saharan countries, we don't have rigorous programs on evaluations. So this is a new phenomenon for us relatively, and that's why perhaps I'm suggesting that we also need to be looking at how we are performing in terms of resource mobilization. The second thing that I wanted to mention about is towards leveraging our expectations. As I already said, I think we are still in the process of ensuring that we have an enabling policy environment to ensure that we are able to implement evaluations that are up to standard. So I think we may need to be much more assessed on progress that we are making towards achieving this favorable environment, because we are not yet there. We need to recognize that. The third point is on enhancing of the national ownership of the process. I recognize that the Minister of Finance, and particularly APND, are the policy holder. But I think we also need to ensure that all the other stakeholders are supporting and working together with the EPND, because it's a very big task to manage, coordinate, and also to regulate these evaluations. So national ownership, I'm happy. I was very much pleased to see that from the presentation that was made, we have now more than 50 organizations, and I should think these are not only government agencies, but also maybe other key stakeholders that are interested. And this is something that maybe we'll need to see more in Malawi and also maybe in the region. So this again links to the last point that I would want to talk about in terms of the championing of the national evaluation systems. So we should not only depend on the or rely on the EPND, the economic planning and development, but also we should see other stakeholders championing the same, maybe expanding the same in terms of their capacity assessments at the district level, but because we also need to recognize that most of the qualified M&E specialists or evaluators are working outside the government. So these are my points for now, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francis. Excellent points, very useful for us also for future discussion. And now I would like to hand over to Candice for your reflections.
Thank you so much. And the colleagues, I think, touched on very important issues, which I think link to what my three points are. So I think the issue around local ownership is something that's really, really important. And the values underpinning the INCE, which is this collaboration and, you know, this searching for common ground, I think is what should drive it more than necessarily the technical aspects of the tool. I think the tool is very good. There are a number of other tools out there as well. So the GEI, for example, does have a MISA, and I think there's strong alignment between, you know, some of the aspects and the pillars that we're saying form part of, you know, a very good, a very effective national evaluation system. But I think for it to be successful, one must also realize that in, you know, in our context, you know, there's some kind of over measurement sometimes that's you know, that sometimes may result in some kind of pushback. So I think the values underpinning it should come forward as being the most important part, you know, that it's about seeking common ground, it's about peer learning, and it's not about judgment, it's not about external judgment. And so perhaps the focus on the self-assessment, this focus on allowing government, for example, to be the first responders, so to speak, or to be really involved in selecting, you know, how it is managed and, you know, who's going to be asked questions and that kind of thing. I think that kind of local ownership, not only government, but also government partners as well, I think is a really important point. The other point is also to perhaps avoid duplication. So to perhaps do like a landscape analysis at the very beginning to find out what kind of measurement of national evaluation systems has already taken place, to see where, you know, parts of the INCE might not be, or might just need to be updated and not necessarily doing work from ground zero, so to speak. I think that would be another, you know, important aspect to consider. And lastly, just something that I was considering about measurement, even peer review measurement and self-assessment on the African continent. A lesson that we can learn is from the African peer review mechanism, which actually, unfortunately, hasn't worked very well. And so what we could possibly look at and see, because all of the elements seem to be there. It was self-assessment, it was local ownership, country-led, you know, set up the mechanisms to do the assessments, peer review, validation. So all the things that one would believe need to be in place in order for this to work. But one of the key learnings, one of the key lessons that we've learned, for example, is that it was overly complicated. That it was, you know, few people could understand what was actually being measured. And also people were like, we're measuring for what? And so I think at the very beginning to simplify, to make it understandable to everybody, why are we doing this? And also to have some kind of theory of change, if you can put it that way, or some kind of pathway. And I think Sophie mentioned this, like what, or somebody in the panel mentioned that there must be some kind of outcome from the measurement, that we're doing this and we're doing the self-assessment because we wanted to see some kind of trajectory of change and improvement over time. And so, you know, is there a need maybe for some kind of baseline and data points over a period of time that can show those involved, like how things are actually changing and developing, rather than just having, you know, a conversation about what the system is like at a particular point in time without it seeing shift and move towards it being strengthened. So I think those are just some of the things that might not be necessarily particular to the African continent, but I think that anywhere where one is, you know, introducing a tool and a process such as this would probably be important issues to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Candice. And I know that Patricia will speak to this a little bit later, so I will leave it for her closing comments on how they are using the INCE. And actually, the whole idea of the INCE is we do take the picture of the national evaluation system, but it's not the only picture. The idea is that the measurements can get repeated every 2 years so that we can actually see the progress and the countries and the governments can see the project progress. So now we have a brief space for any questions. I can see that there is a number of questions that have been already addressed in written, or I see them as answered. So I would like to invite our participants, if there is anyone who would like to raise their hand and briefly share with us any comment or question. That's the moment now. So I can see from the attendees, there's Ronald Itanda. Oscar, would it be possible to enable Ronald's microphone, please?
Sí, solamente necesito que me indiquen a quién iba a habilitar. No veo ningún
Ronald
levantado.
Kitanda, por favor. So,
Listo.
Ronald, now you should be able to speak.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity and the space to learn and exchange around the interesting topic of culture and context in national evaluation systems and capacities. I wanted to pick up on one point which possibly Francis was commenting, where he raised, or where he stated that yes, there are tools with tenants and which we appreciate. The question that I have is, where is this tool coming from? Is it a predetermined or preset tool? Or is it one that evolves from the process of discussion around the issues of monitoring, evaluation at a national level, that then it derives a national context and culture in terms of appreciation? So what I wanted to know is that, is this tool preset or already available as a guide, or is a tool arising out of a process of discussion and engagement with the respective stakeholders in a particular country, and at the end of which they say, I think this is our tool that will guide our engagements? So it's just a question to anyone, or even Francis, help me understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronald. Excellent question. I see that there is Martin Valle, so we can take a second question and then we can ask the speakers to address them. Oscar, please, could you enable Martin's microphone? And we are listening to you, Martin.
All right. Thank you very much, Michara, for giving me the opportunity to contribute. Yeah, I think my question also follows on the question which has just been asked, but mine was directly on, I wanted just to understand some of the generic guiding principles, or in short, like the key indicators that form this this index. Because once we know what is inside the index, then we can actually even beforehand be able to tell how well it can fit the context and the culture of a setting, for instance, like that of Malawi. So it's a question building on the previous one, but mine was like, what are the key tenets for this index? Once we understand that, we'll be able to exactly and also know how well it can fit in the context of evaluation systems for countries like Malawi. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for this follow-up question. So, Francis, would you like to give you your thoughts, and then I would maybe ask Sarah to complement.
Thank you very much. I think there was some sort of misunderstanding. What I had mentioned was that the National Evaluation Capacity Index itself, I was referring to it as a tool that is very logical, and also a tool that provides a good analysis in terms of where we are and the level at which we are with the national evaluation, the tool that is being used in the assessment. So I was not mentioning about a specific tool, but I was just appraising the index itself as a very important tool in this particular case.
Thank you very much, so Francis, for the clarification. And maybe Sarah, then you would like to develop on that the question, which was basically, would we take the INCE questionnaire as it is, or would the tool be a product of a discussion within the context of each country or within the context of the region?
Yeah, thank you very much for this excellent question. Well, the questionnaire is based on like say on the ideal of an evaluation system, which was developed by different actors from Latin America. So if you look at the process for Anglophone Africa, we would first have to repeat the process of constructing the ideal evaluation system. And then based on that, we can develop the questionnaire. So perhaps people would come up with exactly the same evaluation system for Africa as for Latin America. In that case, we're lucky we can just take that questionnaire. In the more realistic case, and actually the one in which we would be more lucky still, the evaluation system in Africa looks different than it does in Latin America, and thus the questionnaire needs to be adapted here. And that's actually what the INCE would be all about this process. And hopefully we can engage a discussion that shows the differences between the different continents and perhaps even the regions in the continents.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So maybe just to add on this, if you want to know more about the National Evaluation Capacities Index and how it was developed for the moment in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have a website where you can read more information. You can also find some of the results and information about the measurement. Because we arrive at the end of the time we have proposed for this session, so I would like to start wrapping up. I think we heard a large number of very interesting contributions, just maybe highlighting a few points that I thought were very important about the national ownership. So that's definitely something that was at the base of the INCE in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we believe that the principles are more important than the tool itself. So as Sarah said, the tool may change, and what we want to keep, it's really this participatory national ownership. We understand that the way how information is shared and how the institutional structures are formed may be different. So we may also want to reconsider the way how the information is collected. We heard well Sophie's suggestions also completing on individual data. Very interesting contribution, Candice, on making things easy, because if you have something that's very good but complicated, that's less likely that it will be used. So that's very well noted. And our colleague from DEval, Juan Carlos, he always say, well, we are going to use 2 slides to present the index so that it doesn't look that complicated for the people. So we have this image of the national evaluation systems, which was in Celeste's presentation, and that's what we use to show what the INCE is. It's a photography of what you see as a national evaluation system. And I also noted the point on the resources, Francis, very good one. I think we will need to listen to this conversation again to make sure that we captured all the important information and the richness. But I would like to thank you for these contributions and hand over to Patricia, who will give us a few closing remarks and also telling us about the experience they had with INCE in Colombia.
Muchas gracias, Mishala. Pues para nosotros el INCE ha sido una herramienta muy importante. Nosotros participamos en la medición de prueba piloto en el 2020 y también participamos en la medición en 2022. Y además aquí esto coincidió perfecto con nuestro documento de política, con el que ahorita estamos implementando y buscamos fortalecer el uso de las evaluaciones. y en esa medición el INCE se convirtió en nuestra línea base de ese documento de política. Entonces creo que los tiempos encajaron perfecto y la idea es que en las mediciones posteriores pues podamos ver el progreso que esperamos que haya a partir del INCE. Entonces digamos que estas calificaciones pues nos permiten saber en dónde estamos y hacia dónde tenemos que ir. En abril se desarrolló el taller de uso, que fue también liderado por ustedes, y a mí me parece que fue un taller muy enriquecedor porque digamos que permite dar esa profundidad a los datos. Entonces ya sabemos dónde estamos, pero pudimos entender también parte de los actores que participaban en el taller, por qué un poco daban esas calificaciones, pero también en las mesas que se crearon y en las discusiones que se generaron, también surgieron ideas muy importantes que debemos poner en práctica para avanzar y mejorar nuestras calificaciones en nuestro Sistema Nacional de Evaluación. A mí me pareció muy interesante en el taller, dado que el INCE lo responden diferentes tipos de actores. Para mí fue muy interesante ver cómo desde nosotros como Planeación Nacional y ente rector dábamos una calificación, pero actores, por ejemplo, otras entidades nos calificaban de otra forma. Eso a mí me parece que es muy enriquecedor también ver cómo otros actores que hacen parte del ecosistema también califican, ¿no? Eso creo que es muy valioso y eso también nos da muchas ideas de por dónde tenemos que trabajar y qué tenemos que hacer para que todos vayamos como en el mismo camino y hacia el mismo objetivo, que es fortalecer nuestro Sistema Nacional de Evaluación. Creo que del INCE y del taller salieron muy buenas ideas. Hubo unos resultados que efectivamente pues son consistentes con por ejemplo, estructura institucional es de las dimensiones en las que mejor calificados estamos y creo que pues eso es un resultado consistente teniendo en cuenta pues como toda la normatividad que señalé al principio y que nos rige y que de alguna forma nos obliga a estructurarnos institucionalmente. Hubo otras dimensiones, por ejemplo, en términos de calidad, donde creo que no nos fue tan mal, pero sí el INCE resalta que debemos mejorar en temas de acceso a información de calidad. Eso estamos completamente de acuerdo. Creo que eso es uno de los principales retos en Colombia y es poder acceder a información y que el proceso de acceso a información fluya y fluya en los tiempos para poder generar evaluaciones oportunas. Y en términos de uso, pues bueno, también hay muchas ideas importantes sobre cómo mejoramos las herramientas que generamos para socializar y difundir las evaluaciones, qué podemos hacer para posicionar nuestros resultados y recomendaciones en las discusiones de presupuesto, cómo podemos alinear ciclo de evaluación con ciclo presupuestal para llegar con oportunidad. Y tal vez hay un elemento que pueda parecer obvio, pero en el caso de Colombia no tanto, y fue un tema que salió en el taller de uso y es cómo fortalecemos el relacionamiento con el legislativo. Si bien en Colombia el Congreso ha venido demandando evaluaciones, nosotros desde Planeación Nacional no hemos jugado un rol muy activo en llevar y presentarlas al Congreso, ¿no? Entonces creo que eso es un tema que salió en el taller, en el INCE, y creo que es un tema que nosotros nunca nos habíamos planteado y ahora entonces nuestros próximos pasos a seguir es, bueno, solamente cómo nos vamos a articular más y mejor con Hacienda, sino también cómo incorporamos al Congreso como parte fundamental también de nuestro ecosistema que de alguna manera teníamos olvidado. Entonces, bueno, yo creo que eso es como parte de la experiencia de Colombia con el INCE. Es una herramienta, la verdad, muy importante para nosotros y nos está marcando en este momento a partir de la segunda medición y el taller de uso que se hizo recientemente, pues nos está marcando un poco los pasos que debemos seguir para avanzar y ojalá en la siguiente medición pues estar cada vez mejor calificados.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for sharing with us this experience from the NEP and from Colombia. think that's very illustrative. And I would like to thank to our speakers for taking the time, preparing their thoughtful contributions and sharing their ideas with us. It was very enriching. I would also like to thank all the attendees for staying with us a little bit longer until we can finish the session. Thank you very much. I also take the opportunity to thank to Carlos Murillo from DEval, who was assisting with setting up the Zoom and the translation. To Anna Urgoiti, who was supporting today with the chat and the technical aspects, and also to the translators who made us listen in the language of everyone's preference. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you again soon.
Muchas
Thank you.
gracias.